This is the daily message for July 17th. Today we're really going to start looking at this idea of confidence intervals. We've kind of alluded to this idea so far, but we haven't really developed it, so that's what we're going to do today. You're going to look at several news articles, and I've also included some notes for you to help you actually see how a confidence interval is calculated. The idea behind a confidence interval, or at least how to calculate a confidence interval, is actually pretty simple. You're going to take your statistic, and then you're going to add to your statistic some error and subtract that error from your statistic. And that, by doing that, your end result is going to be an interval, and that's what we call a confidence interval. So the calculation is fairly straightforward. The complex part behind a confidence interval is the interpretation, or what that interval actually means. And so we've talked about our goal in this course is we want to use statistics to estimate a parameter. And we're going to use the confidence interval to aid us in doing that. So what a confidence interval says is if you were to take lots and lots of samples, and for each sample you calculate a statistic, and on each of those statistics you put the same error. So let's say we're going to put a margin of error for a 95% confidence. What that means is 95% of the resulting intervals will cover the parameter. And that sounds like that's a mouthful, but that's actually what a confidence interval means. So notice that the interpretation of a confidence interval is actually in terms of multiple confidence intervals. And so the confidence interval notes that I've posted for you today talks more about that idea. And so today you're going to see not only how to calculate a confidence interval, but also the interpretation of a confidence interval. And so after today, you can actually go ahead and finish the Beyond the Classroom 2. And notice one of the very last things Beyond the Classroom 2 is going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to interpret your confidence interval. And so basically what I just said there, that is the interpretation of a confidence interval. It means that if you were to take many samples, from each sample you calculate a statistic, and then around that statistic you create confidence intervals. 95% of the confidence intervals will cover the parameter, and that's the interpretation of a 95% confidence interval. And so if you look at those notes that I posted, you'll see a very similar statement. And so when you're asked to interpret a confidence interval, that's the interpretation that you want to look at. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I will talk to you tomorrow.